Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our PBIC talk. I'd like to welcome everyone here at PBIC and also everyone through the online platform. And so just to introduce everyone here, my name is Antisha Dongratana. I am the Assistant Dean for Research and International Affairs at PBIC. And today is an honor for us to welcome Dr. Ted Gover from he's the director of the Tribal Administration Program from Claremont Graduate University in the USA. And today he will be giving us a very interesting and up-to-date talk on the 2024 US presidential election and the implications for Thailand. As everyone know, in terms of the new geopolitical competition, what happened in USA, of course, have an impact on countries like Thailand. And so we would, really, going to be getting lots of insights and knowledge from Dr. Ted today. And so without further ado, I want to hand over the floor to Dr. Ted Gover.
Thank you, Professor Orn. I'm going to share my screen. Well, thank you for having me. I first visited Thammasat University in 1996. And I just remember at that time what a lovely place this is and what an impactful college it is. And I'm very jealous that you have that nice cafe near the river. We don't have that in Claremont, and I wish we did. So it's a really great place to be, and I'm so happy to be back. Thank you for having me. I don't take this opportunity for granted. I'm here to provide an update on the US presidential election that we're having this year and what it means for Thailand, Southeast Asia, and US-China relations. So where are we? Well, right now, Joe Biden and Donald Trump are the presumptive nominees of their parties for the presidency. This is a rematch from 2020, and it's featuring the oldest candidates we've ever run for office. Joe Biden is 81, Donald Trump is 78. The race right now is in a state of flux. It's changing. And the big reason for that is you may have seen last week on Thursday evening, Joe Biden performed very poorly at the presidential debates. And it was on nationwide TV. And it was an embarrassing performance. He lost his train of thought. He did not think coherently. And so you have many people in the Democrat Party calling for Joe Biden to step aside. These aren't so much elected officials calling for it. It's mostly people in the media thus far, but momentum is building. Will he stay in the race? Will he step down? We don't know. I think we may need a good 10 days. My guess is at some point he may step aside if voices become loud enough. Up to now, the race has been pretty close. And in terms of the Indo-Pacific, just to introduce the subject, Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump agree broadly that the United States needs to work with its partners in this part of the world to protect themselves against perceived Chinese aggression. And we can get into what Chinese aggression may be, whether it's economic coercion, pressure campaigns against Taiwan, the South China Sea, et cetera. We can talk about that later. And so both Democrats and Republicans agree on the need to work with partners out here in this part of the world. These are some headlines in recent days among some influential media outlets calling for Joe Biden to step down. The most influential of these media outlets is the New York Times. Increasingly, voters are saying that they want Biden to be replaced by another candidate in the Democrat Party who's younger, but who shares policies. If that were to happen, if there were a replacement, it may just generate some enthusiasm in the campaign. Right now, Biden has a place in history. He will be known as the person who prevented Donald Trump from having a second consecutive term. We don't know what the rest of history will write about him. It could be that his underperformance in this 2024 campaign will lead to Donald Trump returning to power. We don't know. So, how would it work if Joe Biden were to withdraw from the race? Well, all year in 2024, we've had a series of what we call primary elections, in which state by state, there have been elections held to choose who the Democrat nominee will be for the presidency. Joe Biden, for the most part, ran unopposed. He has more than enough delegates for the nomination. In order for him to be replaced, he will have to voluntarily withdraw and give up his delegates so that at the Democrat National Convention in August, they can start deliberating and vote on a replacement. Who are some of these replacements? Well, some people think the current vice president, Kamala Harris. Others think maybe it's Michelle Obama, who the former first lady of the US. I think that's unlikely. She doesn't particularly like politics. But you see in this list here a number of governors. Americans like voting for former governors when they vote for president. So you have here the governor of Michigan, Ms. Whitmer, the governor of Pennsylvania, Mr. Shapiro, and the Colorado governor, Mr. Polis, and others. So up to now, the race has been close. We believe that the election is going to be decided in 4 to 7 states. And there are going to be 180 million total votes cast in the presidential election, and probably tens of thousands of votes will determine who will win. And it will come down to 4 to 7 states that everyone's looking at very closely. We have another factor in this election, which is unusual. We have third party and independent candidates. And these 3 individuals, we're not exactly sure how it will play out, but we think they will take votes away from Joe Biden and Donald Trump. We don't know if they'll take away more votes from Biden than Trump. At the end of the day, it may be a wash, but it's an unusual aspect. We typically don't have third party and independent candidates who generate this much attention. The one who's generating the most attention is the fellow in the upper left-hand corner. His name is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's the nephew of former President John F. Kennedy. The states that we're looking at, we call them battleground states. Sometimes we call them swing states. And they're Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. We don't know exactly how they're going to vote. And so a lot of attention is being given to these 7 states' voters. Donald Trump has been leading all year in these 7 states. The lead has been small, but it's been durable. Right now, Trump is ahead outside of the margin of error in 4 of these states. And so he's ahead with a somewhat of a lead in Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. So if the election were held today, he would win those 4 states. But right now, there's a dead even tie in the remaining 3, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So if the election were held today, Donald Trump would be at 268 electoral votes. 2 votes shy of the presidency. You need 270 electoral votes to be elected the American president. So he would need Wisconsin or Michigan or Pennsylvania. So for the remaining 4 months of the campaign, both Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump are going to spend a lot of money in those 3 states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. I share this slide because something interesting is taking place. There's an unusual closeness in the race for both the states of Minnesota and Virginia. Virginia, for the past 4 presidential election cycles, has voted Democrat. It's been a reliable Democrat state for some time now. Minnesota has been a reliable Democrat state for decades. The last time they voted Republican was for Richard Nixon in 1972. The only reason I raise this is because this is kind of a strange development, and it shows Mr. Biden has some vulnerability if Trump is pulled even in these states. And if Trump wins in either of these states, he will be president. So what are the issues that are being discussed in this campaign? Well, there are many, but the 4 main ones that voters care most about, at least up to now, have been affordability, inflation, in other words. The United States, for the past couple of years, since Joe Biden has taken office, has suffered from painful inflation. Americans are paying more for food and fuel and housing. And so this is Mr. Biden's greatest weakness, and it's Mr. Trump's greatest strength, because what Trump is saying is, hey, if you elect me, I will bring inflation down. I'll make the economy prosper again. The second most salient issue in the election is immigration. You may have noticed in your news coverage here in Thailand, footage on TV and in the newspapers of many people coming into the US illegally, migrants, people escaping difficult circumstances from all over the world, but principally in Central and South America. And it's been uncontrolled, and we've had a number of millions come in, and we don't always know where they are. And many people, voters across the political spectrum now, are concerned about the destabilizing effects of that. People in the United States, overwhelmingly, they're for immigration. They're supporters of it. I mean, that's how the United States was formed as a country. But they want managed and controlled immigration. So this is a big issue of weakness for Mr. Biden. Trump is favored on this issue because for years he's been talking about the need to bring restrictions on immigration and to close the southern border. The third most salient issue is abortion. This is an issue particularly important to young women. And the hope on the part of the Biden campaign is that this abortion issue will motivate Democrats to come out and vote in the fall. The fourth most important issue in the campaign, according to polls, is democracy. Voters are concerned about Donald Trump's attempts to delegitimize the 2020 election and how he tried to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power on January 6, 2021. They're concerned about that. That issue favors Joe Biden. So inflation and immigration favor Mr. Trump. Abortion and democracy favor Joe Biden. What are the messaging of both the Trump and Biden campaigns? Well, this is a lot of text, so you don't have to read it all, but let me just, put it down in a nutshell for you. Mr. Trump says, Americans feel like they're losing their country. They believe that the rule of law has collapsed, that the United States is suffering from many problems, social and economic, and that we've become a laughing stock to the world, that the world is laughing at us. This is Mr. Trump's argument. He also says that Mr. Biden is using the justice system against me to persecute me. And he's saying that the Democrat Party wants to censor culturally my supporters, and that I'm a victim, and only myself is standing between Mr. Biden and the persecution of my supporters. So elect me, and I will solve these problems that Joe Biden created. Again, this is Mr. Trump's argument. I'll solve the problem of immigration. I'll solve the problem of inflation. I'll bring back respect for America again, and I'll make America great again. That's essentially what he's saying. Mr. Biden, on the other hand, he's saying, look, Mr. Trump is a threat to democracy. You can't trust him. He wants to behave like a dictator. He also says, look, inflation, it's lowering. And I created a new green economy. My policies have been good for American workers. Wages are up. And stock market's doing pretty good too. So if you vote for me, my second term will be good for American communities across the country. We will also increase our competitiveness against China. That's Mr. Biden's argument. This is a map of our electoral college system. It's a busy map. You needn't pay too much attention to it. The main points I want to make is in the United States, when we elect our president, we don't just have one election on election day. We have really 51 different elections. We have an election in each state plus our national capital. We know how most of the states are going to vote. We know how California is going to vote. Same with Hawaii, New York, Illinois, Texas, Florida. We don't know how those 7 battleground states are going to vote. So that's why campaign managers study this map really closely. Okay, so you've heard me mention in this presentation thus far public opinion polls. I'll mention a few more. Be very wary of what I say about polls. We need to be somewhat skeptical about the information they provide because polls are merely a reflection of what voters think at any given time when they're asked a question. And polls can be unreliable. And in the United States, we conduct most of our polls by phone. And I don't know what it's like here in Thailand, but in the US, it's increasingly difficult to contact people by phone. People's mobile numbers are not published, they're not public information. So it's hard to find their numbers. And then when you receive a call from a number you don't know, you're not going to answer the phone, at least not in the US. I don't know about Thailand. So it's an issue, it's hard to create a good sample size if you're putting together a poll. Now, back to the issue of polls. Joe Biden has been an unpopular president for most of his presidency. He has been consistently underwater. And when we use the term underwater, we mean to say his public opinion ratings have been under 50%. Right now, they're at 39 or so. Most voters think he's simply too old to do an effective job as president. Why is Biden struggling with voters? Well, Biden has been hurt by inflation. He's been hurt by immigration, and he's been hurt by people's perception of his age and his mental acuity. And last Thursday evening's presidential debate further damaged people's image of him. Despite the fact that the American economy is pretty strong, we have 50-year lows in unemployment, and wages are outpacing inflation. Nonetheless, voters in the United States are not used to paying these higher prices that they've been paying since COVID. Higher prices for car insurance, groceries, housing, healthcare. And American families believe that Joe Biden hasn't done enough to help them. And so when you are disillusioned on the economy in the US, you blame the president, whether it's fair or not. And I'd say one other thing on the issue of his age. Joe Biden can't really do anything about his age. He can't become younger. I mean, today's the youngest all of us will ever be, right? But what he can do, he can give a number of speeches where he speaks vigorously and talks about the future. That may change voters' image of him. I suspect, though, it might be too late given what happened last week. This slide contains photos of past presidents. Up in the upper left-hand corner, you have Lyndon Baines Johnson. In the center, Richard Nixon. And then bottom left, Jimmy Carter. To the right, Jerry Ford. Each of those presidents were damaged by inflation. In the 60s and 70s, the United States suffered from several bouts of bad inflation. And inflation led Jimmy Carter and Jerry Ford to both lose their reelection campaigns. In part, it was a big reason why they both lost. There were other reasons too. Well, Joe Biden has not escaped the same reality. Inflation has damaged him politically. So Americans are gloomy about the economy. Why is that? Well, partly it's inflation, but also COVID money, direct assistance from the government, that has ended. Also, Americans are saving less of their take-home pay because of the higher prices. Polls show that almost 60% of Americans don't have a spare $1,000 for an emergency. Also, US credit card debt is at an all-time record high of $1 trillion. And the US has a national debt of $35 trillion. That's the highest in American history. So this is all contributing to Americans' dour mood on the economy. You don't need to read this slide with great detail. I'll just summarize it for you. Basically, younger voters, 18 to 29-year-olds, they've typically been an important voter group in support of Mr. Biden's party, the Democrats. They have soured on Mr. Biden. Conversely, well, I should say before I change subject there, young voters do not feel connected to Mr. Biden. They don't think that he understands them as they try to begin their lives. They view him as a consummate insider who's just too old for the job. However, Mr. Biden is now doing better amongst a voter group that traditionally has been supportive of Republicans. Who are those people? Baby boomers. Baby boomers are people my parents' age. They're in their 60s or their 70s or older. And particularly amongst baby boomers who have college degrees, they are increasingly supportive of Mr. Biden. So why are older people supportive of Mr. Biden? Well, we don't know exactly. Maybe it's because Mr. Biden is also old. They feel some sort of commonality. We're not sure. We'll know more after the election, I suspect. Okay, this slide basically shows Mr. Biden's poor poll numbers on any number of issues: the economy, inflation, the Israel-Hamas war, immigration, China policy, and Ukraine policy. He's polling very poorly in each of these important areas. The current war between Israel and Hamas, in some ways, I don't want to exaggerate, but in some ways it's transforming American politics. Mr. Biden faces pressure in his own party, the Democrat Party, regarding this conflict. Many Democrats express sympathy for the Palestinian people. Many young voters think that Mr. Biden is providing Israel with too many weapons, and many young voters think that Mr. Biden should provide more aid to the Palestinians. Muslim Americans, for the most part, are members of the Democrat Party. Of Muslim Americans, most are Arab Americans. Palestinians are Arab, so they feel some ethnic kinship there. Arab Americans are very opposed to Mr. Biden's assistance to Israel in this conflict. Most Arab Americans live, well, let's put it this way: the highest population of Arab Americans in the United States, it's in one of those key swing states, Michigan. And so Mr. Biden has to hold on to Michigan if he's going to win the White House. This war is a political threat to Mr. Biden's reelection chances. The best thing he can hope for is that this war ends as soon as possible. Another important voter group for the Democrat Party are Jewish Americans. They disapprove of Mr. Biden's policy in this war, a majority of them, because they don't think Mr. Biden's doing enough. So Mr. Biden on this issue, he really can't win. He's receiving a lot of criticism in different directions. And this is interesting because many US presidents in the past, they've been damaged politically by wars, but on most of those wars, the US is an active combatant. In this war, The United States does not have boots on the ground, but yet the current president is still being hurt by it. This slide basically says that most voters like Mr. Biden's personality more than Mr. Trump's. We call this in political science the likability factor. Mr. Biden, he has higher likability numbers than Mr. Trump. They view him as being more honest and trustworthy. On the other hand, Mr. Trump, according to polls, is viewed as being more effective, more tough, more energetic, and more competent. And they think that he has more of a vision of where he wants to take the country. Recent polls have shown that most voters think they will be financially better off with Mr. Trump in office than with Mr. Biden. So this is a devastating finding that just took place a few weeks ago. Mr. Biden's campaign is very worried about this. I'm going to skip this slide. Basically, the whole purpose of this slide is to share that we may be seeing voter groups in the United States, some voter groups switch allegiances. But for the sake of time, we'll skip it. And if any of you are interested in learning more about it, I'm happy to share this presentation with you, or I can answer any questions you may have. Okay, what about Mr. Trump and his poll numbers? Well, he also, like Mr. Biden, has high unfavorable numbers. 54% of Americans at any given time view him unfavorably. Why? Well, what are some of the things that critics of Mr. Trump say? They say that he lacks character. They say that he's a threat to democracy, given his attempts to delegitimize the 2020 election and interfere with the peaceful transfer of power in January of 2021. They also don't like his sniping and his personal attacks of other people. They don't like how he makes statements how he's going to take revenge if he comes back to power against his political opponents. Mr. Trump, however, he does have a lot of support. He does have a very loyal base of voters. They consider themselves, in large part, not all, but many of his supporters view themselves as forgotten Americans, working class people who the elite don't care about. Also, many of Trump supporters, maybe some don't consider themselves as the forgotten people, but they remember the strong economy when he was president, particularly the first 2 years of his administration. So there is some Trump nostalgia. Well, let's put it this way. There's some nostalgia for the Trump economy when he was in office. You may have noticed Mr. Trump has been in court cases, courtrooms for much of 2024. And on May 30th, he was the first former American president convicted of felonies. He's a convicted felon right now. However, this has not changed voters' views of him. If you don't like Mr. Trump, you still don't like him after this court ruling. If you're a supporter of Mr. Trump, you probably support him all the more because supporters of Mr. Trump believe that he's being unfairly targeted by the justice system. So who's going to win the election on November 5? I just don't know. I can't tell you right now. It's too many things can happen between now and November 5. But I think we can talk about some scenarios here. Biden is in trouble right now because of last week's debate performance. So he may eventually, step to the side. He could be in worse trouble, or his Democratic replacement could be in trouble if the immigration crisis worsens, or if the Israel-Hamas war continues or broadens, or if Washington and Bangkok, and also between Washington and Southeast Asia more broadly. Additionally, Biden, he would follow up and continue on many of those issues discussed in this year's ninth U.S.-Thailand Strategic Dialogue. What were some of those subjects? Well, I listed in that very long third paragraph of this slide. You don't have to read it all, but science and technology, economics, security, climate, cybersecurity, transnational crime, medical tourism, but also, working with Thailand on the Mekong-U.S. partnership, ASEAN issues, the South China Sea, Myanmar, and efforts to release the remaining Thai hostages in Gaza. What about if Trump is elected? Well, I think you're going to see less focus on these issues like semiconductors and human trafficking and public health and education, but you'll see more focus on security, working with Thailand where we can in the security arena. And also, there'll be more emphasis on the part of Trump on how to reduce the trade deficit with Thailand. Thailand is America's first and oldest friend in the Indo-Pacific. And so I think it's really important that whomever the next US president is, make efforts to work with Thailand to meet the realities of today. So this means the United States, whether it's a Democrat or Republican in office, should not force Thailand to choose between Beijing and Washington. That's an unfair position to put Thailand in, and it's an unfair position to put other countries in too. I also think that we need to recognize that Thailand, it's in its interest and well-being to have productive ties with many countries. And Thailand's going to have relations with countries with whom the United States is not always on good terms with. China, Russia, Iran, that's just a reality. So I think that that's going to require some patient and sustained diplomacy on the part of the U.S. And I think that we need to understand in the United States, whomever the next U.S. president is, the different viewpoints domestically here in Thailand. Thailand is a sister democracy. It has political divisions. We need to understand them. We need to understand their nuances. And we can't just assume that all differences can be papered over or that every Thai citizen thinks the same. And also, I think that the next U.S. president cannot take its eye off the ball and cannot neglect Thailand. I think there's a common view here in Thailand that during the Trump administration, the U.S. neglected Thailand a bit, perhaps. And so whomever the next U.S. president is, if Mr. Trump comes back to power, or if it's Mr. Biden or some other Democrat, they need to continually engage Thailand. Okay, trade. Trade, you may have noticed, particularly since 2016, it's become a politically sensitive issue in the United States. Mr. Trump has been berating international trade for some time. It's not completely his fault. Frankly, there's blame to go around both Republicans and Democrats about how certain communities were neglected by international trade. Yet, Mr. Trump did exacerbate that feeling. And so now international trade is sort of a dirty word in the US. And whether it's Biden or Trump, I think it's unlikely that trade between the US and Thailand will be broadened, whomever's elected president next. Also, Mr. Trump is proposing that he will impose a 10% tariff on all imported goods into the United States, whether that's from Thailand or Turkey or any country, really. And he justifies these tariffs as a way to protect American jobs and to bring in the revenues needed from when he tries to make the 2017 tax cuts permanent. Thailand should not feel singled out. Trump
proposes to add a tariff of 60% or more on all Chinese goods. So he wants to intensify the US-China trade war. I think it is important to have some more protectionist measures on sensitive areas of trade. We don't always want to trade with China those goods that will provide them with sensitive military technology. Nonetheless, I do think that Washington should abandon this bipartisan protectionism. I think it's bad for American consumers. I mean, it contributes to inflation. Tariffs are inflationary, and the folks who end up paying for it are guys like me, American consumers. So we paid the higher prices. And I think whomever the next US president is should update and broaden the 2002 US Thailand bilateral trade agreement. But I don't think that's going to happen. Despite my advice, I do think that the next US president will continue to have somewhat of a protectionist view towards trade. And we're probably a couple election cycles away until America changes its trade policy. Until voters are sick and tired of paying higher prices, I think we'll continue to see a protectionist stance. Okay, so how do US-China relations fit in? And what's the state of US-China relations? Well, Washington has moved from a system of, or a mindset of engaging Beijing and the global free trade system to efforts to end its dependence on the Chinese market economy. The US concluded that its prior assumptions about China, that it would become more like the West the more it traded with the world, the US has concluded that its prior assumptions about China were wrong. And perhaps it was a naive view of China. But it now views China as a military and economic rival. This despite the fact that the US and China still trade a lot with one another. In 2022, we traded at an all-time high of $690 billion. Last year was less than that, but still $575 billion in 2023. The American and Chinese peoples clearly like to do business with one another. Why did this change of thinking about China on the part of both Democrats and Republicans take place? Well, when Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, he adopted a much more aggressive national security posture, and he embraced Putin. He engaged in a pressure campaign against Taiwan. He militarized the South China Sea. He engaged in economic coercion against US allies like Australia, South Korea, Japan. But also he refused to share public health data as it relates to related to COVID-19. All of this and others have caused American policymakers to think very differently about the Chinese Communist Party. So what's the result of all this? Well, Washington and the next US president, they are determined to increase US military capabilities in this part of the world. They want to selectively de-risk the American economy from the Chinese economy. And they want to adopt a new industrial policy where they secure supply chains, sensitive supply chains, I should say, and start making more of the critical things that it needs on US soil. How does all this tie into the campaign? Well, regardless of who's elected president, I think Democrats, Republicans, they will be determined to help American partners in this part of the world, whether that's the Philippines, South Korea, Japan, Australia, Thailand. There's been a hardening of views towards Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party, and that's shaping a lot of foreign policy today. And I'll just repeat myself. I think regardless of this new development, American policymakers need to be sure not to force its friends in Southeast Asia to try to choose between Beijing and Washington. What are Biden's and Trump's policies towards Japan and Taiwan? Well, both Biden and Trump, while they do disagree over Ukraine, they do agree on the need to work with the US-Japan Security Treaty. And they do believe in the need to help Taiwan defend itself. They recognize that Taiwan security affects Japan's security, and that the US would have no credibility if it did not come to the assistance of Taiwan if China were to invade. President Biden has said on different occasions that he would use the US military to assist Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Uh, Donald Trump has said that, and then he's also said, well, look, if Taiwan were invaded by China, there's probably not too much we could do about it. So he's sort of waffled on the issue. We don't exactly know where he stands. What are their views on the Korean Peninsula? Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden fundamentally have the same viewpoint that the U.S. must work with both South Korea and Japan in their defense treaties with both those countries to protect against aggression by North Korea. They understand that we failed in our efforts to prevent North Korea from becoming a nuclear power. So now there's agreement we need to focus our efforts on deterring North Korea. So Trump and Biden, they have different tactics. They may agree broadly on the Indo-Pacific policy, but they do have different tactics. We remember during Trump's presidency, he had unusual diplomacy strategies by meeting with Kim Jong-un in Vietnam and Singapore and going to the DMZ with Kim Jong-un. It was unusual. And also he being Trump, he demanded that South Korea and Japan pay the US more for hosting American forces on their soil. Many people thought maybe this is a pretext for Trump withdrawing troops. I don't know. I kind of thought it was a bargaining tactic, but we don't really know. I think if he is elected again, he will make similar demands of South Korea and Japan. He'll also demand that NATO countries pay more. And that I think he'll continue to have a lot of skepticism towards alliances. He has said on many occasions he doesn't support the idea of providing Ukraine with additional aid. So I think we'll see that stop. And I think we'll see, as I stated before, the US trade war with China intensify. In terms of ASEAN, Southeast Asia, in terms of the broader APEC region, I think Mr. Trump will be supportive of both ASEAN and APEC. And he probably won't attend the yearly summits in person, but I think he'll be supportive of them. By the way, how am I doing on time? Am I going too long? Oh, okay. Well, I'll hurry along. Basically, in this slide, what I'm saying is Trump does have a unique view towards diplomacy. Sometimes you could argue he kind of views relations with foreign leaders the way, CEOs of large companies relate to one another. You try to establish a good personal relationship so that you can strike a good negotiation. There have been people who said that that's Trump's approach to diplomacy. It may be, I don't know, but I think there's some merit to that. And it gives us some insight as to how he approaches diplomacy. Biden, for the other hand, he really puts a lot of effort into building up and strengthening alliances. He created this new relationship between South Korea, Japan, and the US. He's, strengthened nuclear deterrence against North Korea. So now, for first time in a long time, we have regular nuclear armed submarines periodically visiting South Korean ports. He's also reinvigorated NATO, and he's kept the West together amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So he spent a lot of time on trying to strengthen alliances. I think whomever's elected in November,
they're going to be supportive of these different groups out here in the Indo-Pacific, ASEAN, APEC, the Quad, AUKUS. I think the next U.S. president is going to try to strengthen relations with India and Vietnam, but also to build on some of the more long-lasting relationships we have out here in this part of the world, Thailand, Philippines, Australia, New Zealand. The next U.S. president is going to continue to be concerned about Taiwan and the South China Sea. Our estimates is that the pressure campaigns against Taiwan and certain South China Sea claimant states will continue, maybe even intensify as Chinese economic crisis prolongs. A reoccurrent example, you've all seen it in the media, these Chinese People's Liberation Army Coast Guard vessels, pressuring Filipino efforts to resupply their sailors stationed at Second Thomas Shoal. Also, the next U.S. president will continue to pay a lot of attention to the Pacific Islands, China's efforts to establish security and political relationships with these island states. Many people view it as being a threat to the ability for Australia and the US to transit between one another. And also they view it as possible efforts by China to increase its power projection capabilities in the second and third island chains. Others see it as perfectly natural for China to want to deepen its relationships with these Pacific Island states. So there's some disagreement on this in other countries, but in the United States, the next U.S. president is going to pay a lot of attention to this dynamic. So whomever's elected on November 5 is going to try to reinvest in U.S. military capabilities in this part of the world. And that means building new weapon systems. And it means expanding the U.S. Navy and increasing America's ability to repair ships and to build ships. That's going to mean larger defense budgets in the United States, and it's going to mean people like myself are going to pay more in taxes. So right now, the United States has 280 deployable vessels. It has said that it wants a Navy of 355 vessels. Right now, China has 370 deployable vessels, and there are estimates that by next year it will have 400. It's difficult, I think, for the US and its allies to compete with China and its ability to manufacture naval vessels. So during this time, I think the US Navy will begin, and the next US president will be putting forth a lot of efforts into having unmanned naval vessels, unmanned aerial vessels, to try to make up for this gap. If you want to have a larger Navy, you need to increase your ability to make things. And so the US needs to rebuild its industrial base. At the end of the Cold War, the US had 9 active naval shipyards. Right now, it has 4 active public shipyards, one in Portsmouth, Maine, another in Puget Sound, Washington, one in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and then one in Norfolk, Virginia. All 4 of those shipyards, they're over 100 years old. They need refurbishments. So it's going to take time for the US to rebuild those shipyards and to build more shipyards. But it's also going to take time to train US workers. We no longer have in our population adequate numbers of people who have the security clearances and have the technical expertise to build things like nuclear-powered submarines. The next US president will realize that during this time, when it's building a new Navy, it needs to have an interim strategy, because it could be China's not going to wait to invade Taiwan, or China's not going to wait to engage in some security incident in the South China Sea. So what do you do? Well,
The next U.S. president is considering developing an anti-navy strategy in which you deter an invasion of Taiwan or some military incident in the South China Sea by having long-range precision missiles in high numbers stationed in different parts of the Indo-Pacific. It's an extremely controversial idea. Countries in this part of the world do not want these weapon systems to be placed out here. But the next U.S. president, whomever that is, regardless of his or her party, will probably put a lot of emphasis and effort into diplomacy and trying to work with these different countries to have these weapons stationed in this part of the world, west of the international date line.
Along those lines, how would you deter or buy yourself time if there is an attack on Taiwan? Well, you have people in the Navy saying the next US president will probably try to develop a lot of new systems where we have unmanned vehicles that can go to war with China to buy time for the Taiwanese Navy, the Japanese, the Americans, and the Australians to come to Taiwan's assistance. So there'll be more effort by the next US administration to invest in unmanned systems to provide a tripwire if there is an invasion of Taiwan. Okay, 5 more minutes. Okay. Basically, the purpose of this slide is to show that there'll be further trade restrictions against sensitive military technologies with China. And it's going to cause more of our friends headaches. This, however, does not mean that US-China trade will end. In my view, war with China and the US, it is not inevitable. Military deterrence and diplomacy can lower chances of war. So I think it's important to keep things in perspective. And I think that the next US president is going to try to work closely with US allies, both from a diplomatic standpoint and a military deterrence standpoint. I think also the next US president needs to learn a lot about China's strategic decision-making, how they think, and also work overtime to try to find areas of common ground. I think the next US president will also need to avoid trade protectionism. We can skip this slide just for time's sake. And in terms of Taiwan, I think that it's important that the US stop sending political delegations to Taiwan. We're sending a lot of governors, a lot of members of Congress to meet with the Taiwanese president. It's fine. I understand why they're doing it. They're trying to show solidarity, but it's more performative in nature. And it just, I think at the end of the day, pokes its finger in Beijing's eye and antagonizes Beijing. If it wants to help Taiwan, it should focus less on the performative aspects and more on speaking softly, but providing them with a lot of weapons so they can protect themselves. And so you don't have to antagonize Beijing in such a public way in order to help Taiwan. There are all sorts of ways in which the US and China can work together. This slide shows you some of those. Climate change, working together to stabilize North Korea, fighting against narcotics operations and arms trafficking, working together on the next US pandemic. I mean, there's a precedent for this. The US and the Soviet Union were very effective in working together in eradicating polio. So the US and China should definitely be able to work together on global public health measures. And I think the US needs to learn from Thailand and Singapore and other friends in Southeast Asia in order to learn more about how China thinks. In this part of the world, our friends, I think, understand China better, partly because of their proximity, but also because of shared culture. And we can learn from you in that regard. That's the extent of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ted. It's a very insightful presentation that painted the picture for us in terms of the U.S. presidential election, the current developments, what factors to look for. At the same time, painted a picture of the world and especially the region, which now a major theater would be the Indo-Pacific region, and of course have implications on Thailand. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Thank you, Kap. Before I ask a question, I would like to clarify myself that I think I find no favor in both of them. I don't like both of them. Okay. So, I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask you. So please correct me if I'm wrong, okay? I think for the last couple of days, so we may heard about the verdict from the U.S. Supreme Court that rule out that Mr. Trump has like the presidency immunity during his action when he was the president. So I would like to ask that. So I think there will be two sides of them. The first one, from some sources that I read and I heard that claim that some of the members of the U.S. Supreme Court were appointed by Mr. Trump himself. And for this verdict might also apply to the President Biden as well. That means he can do anything, like for the official action in his during his presidency. So the question is that the first one, so what are your thoughts on that verdict? The second one, what do the American think about that? And the third one, which is the last one, would be that, so how it will impact like the future and how it will dictate like the U.S. democracy in the future, which is because of the United States is the world leader of the democracy. That's all from me, Kap.
The Supreme Court ruling, yes, it applies to Biden and applies to future presidents. I think it's going to take a while for Americans to form an opinion on this. I think many people are alarmed because what the Supreme Court, their decisions sounded alarming, but in large measure, I think it's in keeping with the founders' vision of the presidency. Now, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. Not everyone agrees with me, so there'll be many people who disagree with what I'm about to say. But a U.S. president's, according to the founders, ought to have the understanding that what their actions while they're occupying the office, that they won't be held accountable for it once they leave office, or even when they're in office. They're acting in their official capacity, and so they should not be sued because of that personally, right? Here's where the devil's in the details. What constitutes an official act? What constitutes a personal act? We're going to find out in the coming weeks and months and maybe even years, because the Supreme Court in their decision, they also sent the case back to the lower federal courts, asking them, hey, it's your job to work out what specifies as an official act of the president, what's more in a personal capacity. One of the examples that's been thrown around recently is, well, could the president order his military to assassinate a political rival, and could that be legal? And I don't have a crystal ball in front of me, but I think that the lower federal courts will say, well, no, that will be more of a decision out of a personal, unofficial nature, because retribution against political enemies is not, one of the listed powers in the Constitution of the president. I mean, the president's powers in the Constitution are fairly vague and short. So there's a lot of wiggle room as to what a president can do legally. So it was a controversial decision.
And I think most Americans, they're going to form their opinions as we learn more based upon what the lower courts say. But I think many people are probably alarmed. I haven't seen any immediate polling on it because it's only a day or two old. Did you ask another question? Did I forget to answer any of your questions?
I think that's maybe all, but I just like how it will be affect in the future.
Yeah.
How it dictates.
I mean, I think what the court wants to avoid is a situation where a president is about to make a certain decision, whether it's domestic policy, international policy, whatever, and then says, "Oh, wait, I can't do that because I might be sued personally, held personally liable for it." If that's a decision he makes on a policy that's a legitimate presidential constitutional act and responsibility, that's not a good thing. We want presidents to have the peace of mind of knowing that they can act without being held personally responsible in official acts. At the same time, you don't want presidents or anyone to get away with murder, right? So it's going to take some time to work these things out. There are checks against the president. Elections, separation of powers, checks and balances, but also the Congress can deny the president money. I mean, the president does not have a printing press in the basement of the White House. He doesn't print dollar bills. That's Congress's job. They are responsible for appropriations. So they could always deny president money. They could always use the nuclear option of impeaching a president. Now, as we've seen in recent history, impeachments are not always successful. You're not always convicted if you're impeached with a crime. But there are measures that Congress can use to rein in a president. We don't want to make too much out of this, in my view. Maybe I'm a little old-fashioned. I think the founders had a lot of wisdom in this.
Thank you so much. That would be all, Professor Kofe.
I have a comment. Actually, I have a question from a friend of mine who can't be here today. But she asked me personally, like, because I was American somewhat, right? And then she asked, like, Peter, why is the two candidates are so old? I mean, doesn't America, which is like the world #1 ranking power, why can't they find somebody younger and more and like younger, basically, like from Ivy Leagues or whatnot? And then I was telling her that, American is very conservative to some extent. I go back to the old history of, come to the New England and throw the tea into the Boston, Harvard, and all that stuff. But, it'll be too long history to explain to her. That's one thing. I think you mentioned it. A lot of people are not necessarily liking the two candidates. Everyone think that like one of them is like really old, Biden, and somewhat, from what I've heard, I haven't followed it thoroughly, but somewhat entering the dementia or that phase of his life. He's like 81, 82 years old, and to become another president, another term, that would push him to like 85, 86, which is wow. I mean, when I'm 85, 86, I want to just chill out watching Netflix already, but still. And then Trump is relatively old as well, but he's a little bit more active and keen. I mean, the sense that when he's, having conversation or giving speeches, that's one thing about the age of the candidacy. So I agree. If the Democrat Party can miraculously somehow find a somewhat younger candidates for the party, and they have to do it quick, because I think majority of people, what on your slide said, the number doesn't look too bad, but people still doesn't like Biden because he's pretty old, right? And that's one thing. So hopefully, yeah, I'm not hopefully, but maybe we'll see. Because I've seen it. I think like the Newsweek or the Economist, on the cover, it said it's time for Biden to leave. Right? It's one of the cover of the magazine. I forgot which is which, but it's supposedly that magazine is quite in supportive of the Democrat Party as well. It was on the cover like last week or this week after the debate. So I watched a little bit of debates after I heard the the commotion. I'm like, oh, whoa, Biden was slurring and didn't really follow through on many of his thought. Also, let me ask you a question that I got to say I haven't really followed American politics closely, since I live here now, basically. But would Mr. Trump be a better presidency in terms of policy overseas, especially in China and in ASEAN? Because one thing is, I remember his first term, he said, American first. So we're gonna focus on America. We're not gonna put our nose in somebody else, in the other country as much. And he, from what I've seen, I'm not an expert on this field, but we know what we'll get from Trump. We know exactly what, I mean, I think we know more from Trump that what he wants to do in relationship with China. He's gonna put 60% tariff on China, and he will do it. He won't budge or negotiate. He'll do it. He'll put 10% tariff on Thailand, and he'll do it. So at least, for example, in China case, I know it sounds really bad that they're gonna get like 50-60% tax tariff on their export, but at least they know, so they can kind of like respond or form their policy accordingly. But with Biden, it's a very classic American Democrat policy where this very complex. Trump is somewhat look like he's complex, but he's simple enough. I want this, and that's going to be done. So in response, to me, I think Trump would be better off for the Asian relationship with Asia, because we know what he's going to do to some extent. So would would that be somewhat correct, like per perspective, or maybe not, because I haven't really followed it closely. And what do you think about one of the things you mentioned quite a lot is about the immigration policy of the US. And that's not just in the US, but that's also in European country too, right? Like a lot from outside looking in. Obviously, I haven't followed this field like closely, but we've heard a lot of at least on the media, saying that we have a lot of people who go to European country and get auto welfare, and they start the political movement of many of the country, some even in the Scandinavia, started to move to the right a little bit, which is kind of rare for me. Because usually for me, Scandinavian are usually very free thinking. They help everybody. They love everybody, But now they kind of start thinking like maybe there's too many immigrants coming in and taking benefit from the welfare system or whatnot. And I've heard horror story, obviously from the media and from just like chit chat that, for example, in San Francisco or in LA, there's lots of homeless and all that stuff. I haven't been back there since like 17, but I've heard a lot of story about that. And a lot of people blame that on Biden. I have friends who still live in the US and work in the US, and all of them are Thai or Asian. And many of them really say like, oh, Biden just basically in the layman's term is like he let everybody have anything, do anything basically, and that could be the downfall of his as well. So what do you think about the immigration policy is somewhat more lenient toward the left? I think it's not just America, but all over the world, in Europe as well. So, all right, I'm not sure if I did put the right question or whatnot, but
Biden is vulnerable on the immigration issue. When Trump was in office, there were certain periods where illegal immigration did increase. But there was also a period during his presidency where he did bring more order to the southern border. He did not build the wall in its entirety. So I'm not referring to that. But he did work out certain arrangements with Mexico so that Mexican security forces could help on their end of the border stem the flows of people. Biden decided when he came to power, he was going to overturn many of these executive orders that Trump had put in place on various policies, but one of them being immigration. And soon after that, things at the southern border really did become out of control, where you had daily thousands of people enter. Yes. And those are the people we know about. there's a statistic called gotaways, which are those people crossing the border into the United States who we know they entered, but we, the United States, were unable to document them. A immigration official was unable to get their name and fingerprints and all that. So this has caused a lot of anxiety in people in different parts of the country because many of these immigrants were transported by bus to New York City, to Chicago, to Washington, D.C., partly as a political ploy on the part of the conservative state government in Texas, saying, okay, you Democrats don't want to support tougher immigration policies. We here in Texas shouldn't have to handle all this burden. We're going to ship these migrants to your neighborhoods. So that's happened. And it's put a big strain on the public resources of Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C. So it's now become a nationwide issue. And President Biden has been viewed as someone who was neglectful. At first, he made a political gesture. I'm not going to be Donald Trump, so I'm going to overturn all his policies. But then it became a much bigger problem. When people said, look, you made a political decision, and what came of that was very bad for public policy, and it's putting strains on our society. So this is an issue that Trump is viewed as one of Trump's strengths. I hope that gets to your yeah.
Impression. To be honest with you, because I lived in the US for a long time, and at the beginning when Trump came into the first term, I was thinking like, oh my God, we as a Asian or Thai, how are we gonna live in, because I love his supporter from the Midwest and everything, right? So, and we thought, oh wow, this client will be a little bit more scarier than whoever compete with him the first time. But then after a while, like most of my friends, Asian, they all vote for Trump in the US at least. And then I've seen like I say, like when he say if he want to do something, he will do it. So it's not too much surprises. Well, Biden, it's a classic American politics where you have to give and take and this and that. But Trump would just like do this, do that. Okay, he did a few things that may or may not agree with. People may or may not agree with, but he does what he says, right? And then somehow it became his strength. I mean, to me, that is.
Yeah, he's transparent. I mean, he says what he thinks, and he's known for following up on what he says he's going to do. So I think you're right about that. Yeah, that's a good observation.
What happened to these two candidates? And I was going back to the moving from England, all the stuff, right? Basically, I think what Trump offer is, I'm not sure if I'm right or wrong or not, but he can able to speak his mind on behalf of his supporter. Some of the stuff he said was like really wild, really wild, and come out from what people really think, but they can't really say it in public or whatnot. But so there's something that lacks in the people who is in politics, at least from the US side, because usually politicians, you have to juggle things around, right? But Trump said it, and many of them sound kind of silly, but some of them are something what people American really think in their mind, but they can say it outright, right? So I think in some way it's something that we haven't seen before, right? And when my friend asked like why both of them are so old, and I explained, I think the youngest president, the young president was, we're going back to Bill Clinton, correct? He was a kind of young guy, but other than that, it's a little bit older guy. I'm not sure George Bush was young or old when junior when he was into a presidency. And then you go back to JFK, who was really young. But other than that, usually the US president are what, 50, 60, not like in the 40s. So that's what I told my friend at least. So I'm not sure if I get it right or wrong.
Well, in the case of Biden and Trump, the reason we're in this situation is Trump has a hold on the Republican Party.
his supporters are very loyal. And so no Republican has been successful challenging him because Republican voters today are really ardent Trump supporters and followers. So they're not going to really entertain other Republicans challenging him. That's why we have Trump, because he's a very able promoter of his ideas and his persona. I mean, Trump is not just a former president, but he's the leader of a movement. In terms of Biden, the reason we have Biden, yes, he's a consummate insider. He's been around, served in the Congress for decades, served as vice president for 8 years, but no one really wanted to challenge him for the Democrat nomination in 2024 because they didn't want to be the Democrat who would go on to lose to Trump. That would be a very bad thing for the history books to say about you. It'd also be bad for your political career. So I think the reason we have these two guys, frankly, is because we don't have enough political courage on either side to challenge them.
Any other question? Maybe I think we have, can do one more. Okay. Maybe questions are given talking about Trump predictability. So what do you think given about the Indo-Pacific, right? Trump, when he came to power the first time, he withdrew from the TPP. So if he is able to become president again, given your current situations and everything, do you think, what is the future for the Indo-Pacific economic framework that, is initiated under Biden?
I think that Trump would abandon that and he'd just look to further intensify the trade war with China by increasing tariffs. It could be that Trump's strategy is to make the trade war painful enough to China so that it will agree to change some of its trade practices. I don't know, it's pretty hard to win a trade war against China. It is the world's largest trading power. And it also has a lot of pride. But that might be his strategy. So I think a second Trump term, we'd see more trade friction, at least initially. But Trump, he is unpredictable in some ways. I mean, he does like to mix it up a bit and negotiate with adversaries. So it could be that he'll try to do what he did in his first term, where he came to an agreement with China, an economic agreement. You may remember he struck an economic agreement with China. It didn't work out. China didn't live up to it. So that was a failed venture on the part of Trump. He got taken advantage of. But he may try to do something similar to that. So I think it'll, in terms of trade, it will at least, in terms of the onset, will be more protectionist.
Okay, I think we ran out of time, and so I would like to conclude this talk. But I'd like to sincerely thank Dr. Ted Gover for a very interesting talk and something that is was impactful to us, to Thailand, I think to the world at the moment. And so before we end the session, we would like to provide Dr. Gover with the souvenir from PBIC a little bit. So I would like to invite our Dean, Associate Professor Peter Raktam to offer the souvenir to Dr. Ted.